The CentreSteer Podcast, a Land Rover podcast by Land Rover owners. For our fifth episode, the panel discusses illegally imported Defenders, Range Rover air suspension, a follow-up to British wiring, and the M word is about eye safety. Welcome to the fifth edition of the CentreSteer podcast. I'm your host, John Costage, currently with a running 109, well, sort of. The Series 3 had an electrical issue, so it's not currently not running, but it will be soon. Sitting across from me in our new studio, sort of, kind of, is Harold.
I'm Harold, and I'm addicted to Rovers.
And sitting in front of me on the computer,
I'm Morgan. I'm from Vermont, and I'm in the middle of doing a frame over on a Series 388.
Great. That's all we have today in the panel, but that's okay, because now we'll talk about the news. So first up on the news, Jaguar Land Rover sales are up in China, down in India, which they say that Tata profits fell by 23%. I think this is for July. But they say they're sagging in the home country of India. Probably just, I think that's mainly a reflection upon the current economy and how things are going. But China, certainly up and coming, and I think you're going to see, I think this shows that Land Rover, as all automakers are going to be doing, focusing on the Chinese market and what the Chinese want, and less about what the United States and the American market wants and Europeans want. Just
like we were to them 30 years ago.
Absolutely, absolutely. So just something to keep an eye on. That the customers that are going to be dictating what your future cars look like are less and less going to be, I think, North America.
Well, like I said, we ran the market for decades. Everybody catered to what we wanted, and now there's a bigger market out there somewhere, so they're going to chase it.
Next bit of news, Land Rover's named Carmaker of the Year by the Motor Trade Association. No, it's not an association, a Motor Trade out of the UK, which looks to be a industry magazine, and they were Land Rover was named Carmaker of the Year for 2013 in July. They were made looks like top of the luxury auto market. Basically, just kind of shows how strong Land Rover is in the UK.
They like selling them over there,
which is good for everybody.
I would assume they like selling them because they do sell, so it's a reflection of sales as well as the relationship between the dealers and the company as a whole, too, because the dealers like to sell what not only their customers are buying, but also the company will stand behind. And the companies have to take care of the dealers in order for the dealers to sell their product, and I think this is sort of a reflection of all of that.
So following the electric Defender news, looks like they have begun testing, and they have officially confirmed the launch of a new fleet of experimental Defender electric SUVs, of course. And they looks like they are out and about, and they're researching them in Cornwall. And so that's good. I think the fact that they're actually, not only are they working on them, but they're, as we've talked about a couple podcasts back, they're actually coming up with the ideas, and now they're testing them out in, looks like in real world scenarios.
Well, fundamentally, it's also encouraging that it's gone from an electric Defender prototype to a fleet of electric Defender prototypes. That tells me they've expanded their program, which is always a good thing.
Exactly. And they've got an interesting project that they're testing them with. They're basically running them as a road train. So it's pulling 12 tons up 6% inclines. So
wow.
They got some nice photos online of these trains with passenger cars behind them, pulled by the electric Defenders.
So when they have the steep grades, then they can put a second Defender behind facing backwards and
push it up
like a real train.
Oh, they can put two together in series.
And yeah.
Well, I guess there was one concern I read about is that the horsepower was not supposed to be as sufficient as one would like. But apparently Land Rover claims that the Defender EV matches up to the diesel siblings in off-road capability and towing capacity.
It's all about torque. It's not about horsepower.
Yep.
Yeah, they have with the single electric motor, they get about 94 horsepower, but that's 243 pound-feet of torque. So,
and you got to consider that it's an electric power plant is good for about 2 to 3 times as much output as a similarly rated internal combustion, because you get full torque at 0 RPM. So that's why you see a lot of guys running the electric car conversions that people do as a hobby. They'll only put like a 20 horsepower motor in there, and it'll seriously kick ass, because the numbers don't. They're not like
it's not
equivalent, like just looking at the numbers. It's not 1-to-1, like you say. So 243 pound-feet of torque is pretty impressive for an electric power plant.
Yeah,
right off the bat, it's there.
Yeah, at 0 RPM, you have full torque.
Yeah, if I could shorten my commute, I would totally have one.
I think if you get them to a reasonable price and they are available here, yeah, I think that'd be the
still waiting for the diesel electric hybrid arrangement.
That would be,
because then your range isn't limited anymore.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, right. That's going to be the big thing.
And they're already playing around with making trains out of them, so maybe they'll hit on that power plant soon enough.
Although it is the perfect car to have solar panels on top and charge as you go.
There is no perfect car to have solar panels on. There isn't enough square footage to be useful.
I know, but it still has a nice generally flat surface. It's got a little large space up there. It's like great.
It makes one think it could be possible.
Maybe someday I'll try it out.
Okay, let me know how that goes for you.
I have an idea, so you'll know. All right, next bit of news in the not strictly Land Rover, but competition. So Bentley, which I think is now owned by Volkswagen, and this is not Rolls-Royce, this is Bentley, because they got split off a couple of years ago.
A different company.
And they are going to make an SUV, and they're going to. It looks like it's going to hit the lineup in 2015. And they, I guess, sales are doing pretty well of other SUVs, as we're probably well aware, including the Porsche Cayenne. And it looks like that'll be, maybe it's direct competition, but I suspect also the Range Rover.
Direct competition or cousin, because the Porsche is based on the Volkswagen Touareg, which Volkswagen owns Bentley.
Right.
Question is this really going to be a new SUV, or is this going to be something badge engineered?
I had read, and not in the story I'm looking at right here, but I had heard it's going to be completely re-engineered. It's not. It's its own thing.
They're going to share power plant or anything else?
That one I don't know. I think that's things that maybe they don't even know. But a little bit of other information to throw out. It's supposed to be a luxurious SUV.
You think?
And they're talking prices starting at $271,000.
So right in the standard Bentley price range.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Whereas I guess a Porsche Cayenne starts at $48,000.
Yeah, but the one you actually want to drive is a little bit more than that.
It is, yes. But there are, but getting to the Land Rover side of things, there are Land Rovers that push 6 figures now. There are, you can get that. I don't know which one exact model, but I do know there was the Range Rover Autobiography Edition with the supercharged, turbocharged, and all this business, and it goes for like $110. So.
Yeah, that doesn't actually surprise me all that much anyway, because they've been pushing the envelope for a while.
It turns out that Land Rover is actually testing a Range Rover diesel-electric hybrid right now.
Okay.
They're saying they're using a 47 horsepower electric motor, an 8-speed ZF transmission, and a lithium-ion battery pack. So that electric motor can do about 120 foot-pounds of torque.
Okay. So it'll be equivalent to the V8 once it all cycles out.
Exactly.
And then you've got a small diesel to keep the lithium ions up.
Yep. And it looks like that brings the mileage up to about 44 miles per gallon, Imperial.
Wow.
So probably when you convert to U.S. gallons, maybe 36, 38, something like that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Not bad for what it is. The Range Rovers are a big, heavy truck anyway, and of course this isn't going to be a lightweight by any means when you get that hybrid stuff in there. But it wouldn't be the platform I would use to try this technology with, because I think where it's really going to shine is when you start towing and doing other utilitarian stuff with it. But it's certainly an interesting idea, and I'm glad to see them try it in anything.
Exactly.
and really increasing the mileage from 12 and 16 up to 32, 36, or 40 is pretty significant.
That's a giant leap for them. Definitely.
It's huge, yeah, and that would look good too. I mean, it shows across your whole brand, not only when that specific model, but it'll reflect upon the whole brand.
And it may be they're attempting to try it in a Range Rover because that's the client base that could actually afford this.
True, yeah, because there's always more. You're going to pay more for that technology too, since it's new.
Yeah, well, I guess even an electric Defender is going to be expensive too. But
yeah, it could be prohibitively expensive.
Yeah, in the Defender market, but it's hard to say.
Before we do the last bit of news, which we want to talk about illegally imported Defenders being destroyed in the United States as they come across the border. But before that, we're going to have Morgan's going to talk about some events coming up in the next near future.
Yes, and a couple of these we actually covered last time, but since most of them are occurring in September or the beginning of October, it's probably good to cover them one more time. So Peterborough, which is the Land Rover owners show, is coming up the 7th and 8th of September, and that's in Cambridgeshire. That one is LROshow.com. One close to me, which I have missed the last few years, and I think I'm actually going to be able to make it to this year, is British Invasion in Stowe, Vermont. And Land Rover is actually one of the marquees for this year, and that's September 20th and 22nd.
Before we go on, what's the main purpose behind the show? Is it just British cars? Is it something else?
Yeah, it's pretty much any British vehicle. It's an annual show that's been going on for quite some time. Stowe is a very popular ski area and tourist town here in Vermont. So beautiful town. Everybody shows up in British vehicles. They do a parade at the end. Pretty sweet show.
Way to kickstart the town before the snow starts flying, too.
Exactly. So that one is britishinvasion.com. I don't know how they ever got that domain, but props to them. And then let's see. Exactly. And then close to home for you guys is Concave, and that's September 19th through 22nd.
Correct.
Do you guys want to touch on that one more, or did you guys cover that last time?
We talked about it last time, but we're still planning to attend. At least some of us are. I won't be able to attend for the whole 4 days, but
we will definitely have a presence there from the local club.
Yeah, and I think it's only is it 4 or 5 hours from here? It's
not even. I mean, the old Mar site was
6.
almost reachable in that kind of time, and this is, it's just across. The real skinny part of Maryland there, where it's only a foot wide, and it's on the far west part, right? Yeah, but it's a very far north in Virginia too, so it's just across the line.
That's
we go
Gore.
out on yeah, exactly.
It's
off of 70. It's in Gore.
Oh, Gore, Virginia.
Yeah, where we cross over. We do the crossover the Mason-Dixon line. We hit Maryland for about 30 seconds, don't blink, and then we're in Virginia.
Right. Oh, okay.
And it's not too far from there.
Oh, good. Yep. So we're going. At least I plan to go.
Nice.
And we'll take some video, and that's going to be. I think that's our official club outing this year. Every year we used to go to Mar when Mar was big. And that would be we'd try to get as many people from the club together, and then come Christmas time when we have our holiday party, then we have a video coming out of that. So
nice.
This year, the plan is to do it from Concave.
And I think the only other one coming up soon, which you also touched on briefly last time, is Land Rover National Rally, which is put on by Sullyho Society. And that's in Ouray, Colorado, October 2nd through 6th. So that's a longer one. And that's LandRoverNationalRally.org.
Is it actually, is it in October? I thought it already took place.
I thought it just ended.
Because
did I grab last year's dates?
you may
They move
I
around
might
a
have.
bit because of site availability. I think it was this year in August, and I think it's done.
And the reason I say that is because one of our other club members, Bill, has just come back from the West, and I know he took a Series 3. I think he towed it, but he took a Series 3 out this year and came back, and I think he just got back. So
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, that was the 13th to 17th of August. So, yep, my bad. Grabbed 2012 years.
The arch pictures and all that because he did the trip.
He did the trip. Well, he stopped at I don't know if you saw this. He stopped at the Arch in St. Louis and let everybody know that there are now barriers in front of the steps to the Arch, which was kind of a neat thing.
Oh, it's absolutely hilarious if you know the backstory.
If you know the backstory, which we might as well go into the backstory a little bit. I think we talked about this maybe the last time, but I don't remember. Another Land Rover guy in North America who's probably best. I don't know if we can say his name or not, but he was traveling.
Let's just call him Q.
Let's just call him Q. He was traveling out west, and feel free to update the story as I go. He was traveling out west, I think, to the National Rally.
He was doing the National. It was several years ago.
Was this his Series 1?
No, it was a 2A.
2A. And he, as you do, you're traveling across North America. You stop, take pictures in the various places. He stopped at the Arch and pulled up onto the steps of the Arch in his truck because he could. B, he thought it
backed her right up the steps. Thought it'd be a cool photo op under the Arch.
Exactly. And all of a sudden, people from out of nowhere show up in suits and badges, and he's detained and questioned for several hours, and they want his camera, and they want to know why he's there and what's going on.
And this is not just Park Service; this is also Homeland Security.
And the FBI showed up, and DHS showed up. And
all the alphabet was there.
Yes, and he eventually was allowed to. Eventually was let go, and he kept his camera, kept his pictures, and everything. I think he did keep, or they delete the pictures. I think they deleted the photos. I seem to recall the photos.
I don't think they deleted all the photos.
I think the photos of him on the steps that he had taken, I think, were deleted, but the other general photos were not. But anyway, so that's the version. That's the story. He was detained and stopped and had tried to take a picture. Now,
actually, I don't think all of the deleted photos or all of the Arch photos were Rover on the Arch. I'm sorry, I'm not speaking well here, but the pictures of the Rover on the Arch, I think there are a few in existence because there is a T-shirt available.
Ah, I see. This I did not know. So I guess if you type Rover on the Arch, huh?
I forget how you get it, but Bill Fischel can fill you in on that.
We should get someday we should get Bill on the.
And this is why I say that Bill's picture from this year with the barricades in front of the steps would be good for the reverse side of the T-shirt because there is a T-shirt with a picture of the Rover on the Arch. Which is a nice picture, but it's only hilarious when you really understand the whole story.
The whole story, yes, right. It is a funny story, and Q tells a good story, and that certainly was. Maybe
it certainly loses a lot in the translation from Q to us.
Yes.
It's much better from him.
Maybe we should put that as an idea. Get him on the podcast, talk about his story.
A little guest feature.
And that's it for the events coming up for September and October. So I guess that's back to our last news story about the Defender seizures.
Good, thanks. This is more than news, though. I think this has become kind of a big thing. There's a lot of discussion about this on several websites. I saw a lot of discussion on Facebook, and there's some discussion on our own club website about it. Basically, there's two bits to this story. First, car driver back in, I think it was May, reported about their headline, I thought was pretty good. Feds declare war on black market Land Rover Defenders. So some interesting things in this article. They talk about how Customs and Border Protection, CBP, worked with NHTSA, and they seized more than 20 vehicles in the past 18 months. In particular, March of this year, they carted off almost 20 Defenders from a chiropractor's house in suburban North Carolina. And further reading the article, I thought there's some interesting parts here. So Customs and Border sat down with some other federal agencies and wanted to find out what the problems were, pain points, and as the word they used here. So they asked NHTSA what their pain points were with unauthorized vehicles coming into the country. The answer: Defenders. So NHTSA and has been working with Customs and Border to basically seized vehicles and put a big check on the vehicles coming into the United States. And this all is because of the U.S. regulations on vehicles. They have to be up to 25 years. They need to meet current American standards, and I think it's 18 for emissions, but it's 21
for emissions, 25 for safety,
and 25 for safety. So that's kind of where the problem is. Of course, there's other issues with, is that really necessary? We can get into that later. But the other interesting thing that has also developed out of this is, I guess we can call this Land Rover snuff film. I honestly don't understand why they did such a deliberate way. I guess I do understand why they did it. But Customs and Border put out a press release that in August, where they destroyed what they claim was an illegal and unsafe import, Land Rover Defender at Baltimore, and which oddly enough is the location I used twice for my importation of two vehicles, which were both of age. They were properly imported.
They were legally imported.
They were legally imported. They were properly of age, and so they did that. And they also have, in this press release, to discuss how they have been checking all ports, looks like, on the East Coast, Norfolk, Charleston, Savannah, Jacksonville, even Houston and Tacoma, Washington, which I know is on the West Coast, that have violated the federal highway safety standards, including standards requiring airbags. So basically, there seems to, if you're importing a Defender, which is something I know, which is very germane to this podcast and to those listening, and is bringing in a Defender into the United States, you need to be on the lookout.
Well, you need to be careful. And the reason why the government is cracking down on Defenders in particular is because they've been made for so long, and they all look alike. So it's really easy to counterfeit one. And, in fact, the one they crushed this past 2 weeks ago or whenever it was, that was a counterfeit, and that was the big issue with it. It was masquerading as an old truck, but it wasn't an old truck. And so they've had a real problem with that, and so they've been cracking down because there's been more than their fair share, so to speak, of Defenders coming in illegally relative to other models. And so that's why they've made it a special area. So if you're bringing one in legally, kudos to you, that's great, but you got to be careful. Make sure your paperwork is all in order, and be prepared for delays, because Customs, I can pretty much guarantee it, is going to flag it. They're going to look at it. They're going to examine it very carefully, and if it doesn't look old to them, they're probably going to ask Land Rover for help, and they're going to make sure that it is what they think it is, or isn't what they think it is, if the case may be.
So I guess they would also find out where all the VIN numbers are. And now, in the last 20 years, VINs have to be punched on the frame and in other places. Is that right?
Well, Land Rover historically has liked to put VINs on frames anyway. But yeah, like all the major components now have a VIN on there. And there's a lot of and there's some hidden places that people don't know about that the manufacturer can clue them in to look at. And if the numbers don't match, which, mind you, that can happen for innocent reasons, especially with Defenders, because they're such kit trucks anyway. You swap a part out. You got a bad bulkhead, you swap the bulkhead. But if it's got a different VIN number, be prepared to explain yourself.
Yeah. Interesting, in the press release from the Customs and Border people, they said the value of the vehicle that they destroyed was $25,000. However, the resale value in the U.S. can run as much as $150,000 per vehicle, depending on its model, year, and condition, which I'd say it's very high, but it's very possible.
And that's the incentive. And the thing is, where that benchmarks itself is that the genuine North American spec 93 Defender 110s, of which there are only 500 and a quarter, they go for big money because there were only 500 and a quarter of them. The problem is everybody makes these other trucks and makes them look like the North Americans and think they're going to bring that kind of money. And, well, sometimes they do, because people are stupid, and they'll pay it because they think it's the same truck. Sometimes it doesn't, but the incentive for making a lot of money is there, and that's where I think some of this problem with illegally importing them comes from.
No, definitely, I think so. There certainly is big demand, as we are well aware. And you're right, they haven't changed much, especially in the outward appearance. So it's very easy it seems to be very easy.
It would appear that there's an incentive there. And the thing is, there are people with money who also know the Defenders well enough to know the progression of things. And there are people who will pay good money to get a late model Defender, which they call a Puma truck, get one of those in, and there are guys that are putting VIN plates off of 1983 110 and masquerading this late model Puma as an old truck, and that's where the real problem is coming in. It's a forgery.
Well, I guess that's a good point. I just thought of the reason this is just starting now is because the early Defenders, which were not called Defenders as we know, are now starting to get of age that they can be legally imported. So there is now a greater chance for forgery to occur.
There is.
The model didn't exist, 27 years ago.
Well, what was happening then was people bringing in 110s and slapping a VIN plate off of a Series 2A and telling somebody, oh, this is from 1978.
Right. Yeah.
Although you didn't hear about that as much because when those got caught, it was pretty easy just to send them back.
Right. If you're lucky, they send them back.
Well, yeah, and there is the rub there. I think some of this story with the crushing is CBP trying to make an example of this and make it a dramatic example because they really just don't want to be hassled with all these illegal imports if they can scare some people off with the risk. But if you read the law, they've had that power to do that for a long time. Typically, they'll send them back if something's not quite right. But if they can see that it's blatantly a forgery, they are probably likely to seize it and destroy it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the problem with a forged truck is that how do you know the truck's not stolen? Number one. It's because that's the quickest and easiest way when you steal something to sell it, offense it, if you will, is to put a title off something else on it so that it looks legal and you have a title you can transfer. So they don't know. I mean, you got this modern truck. Where did it come from? How can you prove it wasn't stolen? Guess what the most popularly stolen vehicle in England is? Defenders. So again, it's a problem area.
Right.
The other problem is that they're having in Europe is cloning titles. So you're putting it. Okay, you've got the donor truck, say a late model Puma truck that somebody wants to sneak into the country. You're going to put a title off of an 84 110. Okay, people will go out and clone the title off of that 84. So now on paper there are two trucks on this planet with the same VIN number. Which one's the real truck?
Right.
Where what's legal, what's not, and maybe not in this case is it such a big deal, but when you clone VINs, it becomes a major support headache for the manufacturer. Not on something 25 years old per se, but certainly when you're talking warranty support and also product liability issues, which do extend beyond the expiration of the warranty.
Or if the vehicle does get stolen eventually, then which one? Well, I found two of them. Which one's yours?
Yeah, it's identity theft for vehicles is what it is. What it comes down to.
Right. So there was a lot of consternation in various places about how horrible this was, and I guess I'm not in that camp.
Well, the problem is I've been around long enough and I've seen this issue for long enough. Every time there's one of these stories comes out, people come out and they get up in arms about it, and that's fine to be against the laws the way they are. But then you get these ignorant people that come out and just say stuff, and they haven't. You can tell they've never actually read the law because they have no understanding of it. They don't know even the letter of what they're arguing against, which is, if you don't argue about something you don't even know about.
Right.
That's my thing on that. Sure.
Well, there is. I think the law is kind of cheesy. It made sense at one point, probably back in the day when there was you didn't have necessarily global manufacturers, and you had manufacturers in Europe and you had manufacturers in North America. But I think as things have become more global, the vehicles are pretty much the same no matter where you are. That the 25-year, 21-year doesn't seem to be as critical as it used to be. But there's been there's a movement to get that changed to say 15 or get rid of it altogether.
Well, there are of course exceptions to that, but things are heading more towards a global standard. But again, the law reads if you can show that it meets North American standards, then they let it in, no matter how old it is. And so I think if you're really building something that's the same, just put a sticker on there saying it's the same. It's be simple for the manufacturer to do that.
Right.
But the other thing is that the loophole, well, it's not really a loophole, but the provision they've made in the law for getting in things that don't conform is that you use a registered importer. that brings it in, and he certifies that it will meet North American specs by the time it's handed over to the person that wants to buy it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine. That works around the same thing. And if they made that process a little simpler to work with, that would be another workaround.
Right.
And then your of course your third entry there is the exemption. And once they're past a certain age, they're exempt from the regulations, and then you can pretty much bring in whatever you want, and that's fine. And the justification for that particular loophole is that they felt that given how long people keep their stuff versus how long cars last, I guess you could say, that by the time they get to that age, that statistically there won't be that many of them around, that it won't really affect the overall safety of the population all that much. That's the thought. Now, my thought with changing that threshold from 25 years to 15 years is that cars are getting older all the time. So if you're really trying to stay with that same statistical insignificance, you really need to raise that threshold from 25 to 30 or 32. So getting it down to 15 is really just getting it down to where people keep their cars anyway. I mean, more or less. I'm not saying that cars are 15 years old now, but the point is the average age of a car has gone from 3 to 5 to 7 years.
Right. But they're also, I think that's a lot to do with the reliability and a lot to do with...
Well, exactly. Cars last longer now.
Cars last longer. But also, I don't know that I would agree that increasing the exemption period, if we'll call it that, would help as much as lowering it, because I think lowering it, you're going to get cars that are probably... Most likely the cars that you would bring in are going to be up to standard anyway. They're going to still be better than a 30-year-old car. Than, say, a 15-year-old car is going to be more have better safety,
right?
Better emissions.
I'm speaking strictly from the purpose of the original intent of that loophole, being that statistically it was a small percentage of the population of cars on the road. I'm just saying as people keep their cars longer and they age longer, that exemption becomes less and less useful to the government as far as keeping that number of non-conforming vehicles statistically low.
Well,
I know it's kind of a weird mathematical concept I'm chasing here.
I see that, but I still think that if you were to lower the time period, say 10, 15 years, I still think you would have an extremely low number of vehicles that are not suitable to be on the road, because you're still going to have the population of cars is still better. They're still safer. They're still better environmentally than the ones that were 25 years old.
In terms of by design, yeah, they're closer to our standard than the ones that are 25 years old. Yeah. Let me throw this at you though, as long as we're on this. When you import something that's 25 years old, you pretty much know you're going to have to go through everything on it. You've been there, you know what I'm talking about. But
Twice.
Yeah, you pretty much you plan that you're going to have to go through the vehicle. You're going to have to go through all the brakes, the electrical, make sure everything's up to snuff. And so by the time you really actually finally get it on the road, it's really in good shape, and it is a safe vehicle.
Right.
Now you bring in something, say they lower it to 15. You bring in something that's 15 years old. It's still running. It seems like it works. You're going to jump in it. You're going to drive it. Are you going to check it out as thoroughly? Probably not.
It's a valid
and at
point.
15 years, you're starting to get to where dumb things are going to start happening that you don't expect because it was in good shape. You got an inspection sticker on it last year, but now all of a sudden you got a brake line that rusted out. You got this little thing that's happening, and all of a sudden you got these little things happening, some of which are significant. I mean, I put the foot down on the brake pedal of my truck last week, and it went to the floor because I popped a brake line that was rusty.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gotten to the age where little things like that are going to start happening.
That's true. I guess at 15 is about the time, 12, 15 years.
That's that age.
Is
and
when
it hasn't
weird things
worked
happen.
its way
Yeah.
past that to where by its 25, either somebody else has already gone through everything and it's in good shape, or you're going to plan on doing it. But at 15, you're at that kind of that rollover point where people haven't done stuff and you don't really plan on doing it because you figure, it's still in good shape. It looks good. It still looks good on the outside. I'm just going to drive it because it runs.
Interesting. That's a good point, and one I hadn't considered.
Yeah. So the takeaway from that I would propose, I mean, since we're talking about ways to change things, if you wanted to have a 15-year exemption, change from the 25 to 15, maybe do it on the condition that you use a registered importer to go through it and check it out and make sure it at least meets the standard that it was manufactured to 15 years ago. Or at least, let's say, the year it was made. Make sure everything that it came with still works. Much like an MOT or a like our local inspection would tell you if it's there, it has to work kind of thing. You just get away from the idea that somebody can just import it and just drive it and not worry about it. It really needs to be gone through system-wide to make sure little things like that aren't going to start happening so that the vehicle actually is as safe as it could be.
Yeah, I think that sounds completely fair. And like once you get into like the 15-year mark, you also get into like, a lot more electronic equipment on automobiles.
Yeah,
any
which
type.
are just starting to fail at that point too because the wiring's gone kaflooey or something.
Exactly. I have an older vehicle, so like I just replaced the ABS module. Something like that. That's a big safety, a very important piece of safety equipment to have on the Fritz. It's one of those things where at that age it was very new technology, yet now it's very old of very early technology. So it's just sort of a very problematic era to be importing vehicles on and not testing them fully.
Right.
So I agree completely.
Yeah, getting back to these stories, I don't recommend reading any of these comments. I was just looking through some of these.
So many ignorant people out there.
It's like, it's a complete waste of time and money, and they can catch terrorists, but they can't, or they can't stop terrorist attack, but they can, but they can crack down on private car imports. It's like, people, you don't think you're getting what this is all about. Maybe the law is stupid. Maybe 25 years may or may not be the right time period, but.
Well, you really want to argue it. I think a lot of the regulations that the North American vehicles have to certify to are dumb too, and they always have been. But the law is the law, and unfortunately, I think a lot of the safety stuff's driven by the insurance industry, not by anything really sane as far as safety is concerned. But until you change those standards, I don't think just making it okay to loophole your way out of them is the right way to go.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the insurance industry certainly does run how a lot of cars are built. I don't think people really realize, and it certainly has happened even in Europe, where they have that pedestrian requirement of how high the hood can be, and so I think that's where your real problem is less the government is just kind of enforcing what these other folks want.
Yeah, it's not about them saying what you can and can't have. It's
yes.
The government will let you have whatever you want as long as it doesn't break the law. And the problem is, I think some of their laws are stupid, but the law is the law again. Right. Yes. Back in the 80s, the big hot issue with the gray market imports was the headlights. Well, to a certain extent, marker lights, turn signals, tail lights, but those are pretty easy to sort of certify. But the Europeans all had these beautiful swoopy bodyworks and stuff, but the headlights couldn't meet American spec because the American spec at that time was that the headlights had to be a certain size, a certain shape, a certain height. They had to be flat on the front. They had to have those 3 little glass nubs so that they could mate up to the headlight aiming equipment. And there was no good way to do that with ones that had the fared-in glass fronts with the replaceable bulbs behind them. They weren't sealed beam, which was the law. I mean, it was clearly 1930s lighting technology that was being mandated on all North American vehicles in the 80s. And that was the big thing. And until actually those laws got changed in this country, and there are new designs that actually meet the North American lighting regs that mesh with the rest of the world, nothing really changed. And then when that happened, of course, then the car started looking better too.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and also it was easier to change the bulb.
Surprise! They started making cars that look more like the Europeans. Imagine that.
Well, that's when Ford could have world cars. And
they did, but they had replaceable front ends basically. Ones with nice looking headlights and ones with ugly American ones.
Well, as someone who has imported 2 vehicles from the UK, one from Liverpool, which I find interesting, I don't know why. This certainly is something I'm going to continue to follow, and because it's interesting to me, and I may import more in the future. But whether you agree with the law or not, and whether you think the law is stupid or not, it still is the law, and it's something that you want to follow and not get yourself into trouble because I think most people probably wanting one of these vehicles, they're going to do the right thing because they want the vehicle, and not doing the right thing and may result in the vehicle being destroyed, which is certainly not something everybody wants, because we still want to keep the vehicle, even if it is so that in 25 years you can import that vehicle. So I think you want to follow the law, which is you may not like it, but that's the way it is. And if you want to change the law, talk to your representative, and that's really where to start. I know there is a petition on the White House website, but
it seems like there's always a petition. Every time this story comes out, somebody starts one of these petitions. The problem is they get the least literate of their buddies to try and write this thing, and it doesn't present well to even if it did get the 25,000 signatures that it needs for the White House to officially respond to it. As soon as they try and read the thing and see that it was written by somebody who doesn't really, number one, understand the law that they're trying to address, which, I mean, how do you legally refute something that you haven't even read ever? That's the thing. But the petition doesn't really address the law properly, and it doesn't use complete English is the other thing. And really, if you want to do this, do it right or don't bother.
True, do it right and understand what you're trying to change and why, and don't simply say it's stupid, because I see a lot of that comment going around. Well, is this stupid? It's a waste of money. Well,
it doesn't help you do that. I mean, what's that accomplish? Just waste your wind.
Exactly. It's more waste of money and time is really what it is. So we'll continue to follow this story, such as it is. I don't in future podcasts, but I don't think anything's going to change here. But there you go. That's so basically it all boils down to, if you want a Defender, import one legally, and if you want to buy one that's already here, there's people that will sell you one. I tell you, I can end it this way. People now, they come up to me and they'll see me driving, the Series 3 in particular, and they'll say, "Oh, that's great. I need one of those." I'm like, "No problem, $25,000." And I think every time I talk to somebody, I raise the price like by $5,000. I'm like, because that's what in my head, that's what it's going to cost me to deal with the stupidity of trying to import another truck.
Well, and as you drive it and enjoy it, of course, its value in your own head goes up too.
It does. That is very much the case. When you have a functioning truck that you've imported in particular, and it's running nice and it's having a good time, and other people seem to enjoy it, and they come up and they're like, "Oh, I'd like one of those." I'm sure, no problem. You're going to pay for my pleasure. It's really what it comes down to. Compensate me.
It's kind of like supply and demand in the sense that the more people that enjoy it, the more valuable it is.
Yes.
So every time somebody comes up to you, of course its value goes up.
So currently for a Series 3, I'm up to $25,000. I think that seems about right.
That's righteous bucks. I hope you get it someday.
Me too.
That means the value of mine just went up too.
Oh, absolutely. You need
to sell yours for $25. Mine just went up in price too.
That ambulance of yours, you could easily, you could probably, if it was nicely kitted out, and it is, but I think that you need to fix the rear end a little bit. I mean,
I need to fix a lot of little things on it.
Little things. But if you were to make that the box, the ambulance part, so that you could more easily sleep in there for camping purposes, I think you would double the value.
Well, and that's the funny thing is that's kind of like the big thing that people do in the UK with them is they camper convert them. In fact, anybody going to the LRO Show in Peterborough, there is a club of 127 ambulances that have been converted to campers that will be there in full force. They're sort of friends of mine.
Nice. No,
so look for them.
Cousins across the pond.
Cousins, yeah, and the trucks are cousins because I have a 109. I haven't stepped up to the 127s yet because they've only recently hit the 25-year window.
Harold and Ward.
Back in the 80s, I used to love watching public TV because they had some cool shows on. One of my favorites was This Old House. Later on, they spun off a show just for the Norm Abram, the lead carpenter, had his own show called New Yankee Workshop. And he used to make all kinds of period furniture. Of course, the backstory on that was that he had to stop doing the show because he had so many pieces in progress and unfinished copies that were stacking up that his wife got kind of upset with him. But I'm digressing. That's not the point. Norm used to always start off his show. Once he explained the project, he would say, "Let's talk for a few minutes about safety." Make sure you read, understand, and follow every step of your owner's manual. And also know that no piece of safety equipment is more important than these safety glasses. Always, we used to joke about that because it was sort of canned and put together, but it's really not a joke. It's pretty serious stuff. Safety is very important. When I was in college, my machine shop teacher used to tell stories about getting metal in his eye and having to have surgical drills go in and pull it out, and some of the other things that were done to him to get little bits of metal out of his eye that had gotten in by accident. And we used to think that was pretty weird. And today, after just having had the second of such procedures to myself, I can tell you it's no joke. It's not funny. There is nothing fun about it. And it's just so important to protect your eyes especially, but safety equipment is important. Being sensible, not being stupid. Have someone there to help you in case something goes wrong, definitely. But wear safety glasses. I wear safety glasses all the time, and I still occasionally get metal in my eyes. It's an occupational hazard. I work. Things happen. But safety glasses stop most of it. However, they're kind of like condoms. They're only 98% effective. So in 30 years, I've had an incident twice where I've had to go in and get metal extracted from my eyes. It's not fun. It's very uncomfortable. You feel like crap for days afterwards, and your eyes are burning. And it's not cool. So first line of defense is definitely the glasses. You know, people talk about wearing gloves on your hands. That's a good thing. But I'll tell you what. You lose a piece of a finger, they'll stitch you back up. You're still okay. You cut the whole finger off, they can do some corrective surgery, and you've still got a reasonably functional hand with the finger short. You lose a thumb, they can take a toe, they can transplant it. You've got something of grip. But you lose an eye, that's not fixable. You can't put one in. There's no transplant. There's no artificial eye. There's none of that stuff. It's one of the few things that can't be replaced. And it's a life-changing thing to lose it. So take care of them, folks. Keep your eyes.
So in the United States, there's a show. I think it's a British show that is also available in Britain called Wheeler Dealers with Mike Brewer. That's it, and Ed China, Ed Double D China. That didn't come out right. And
for so many reasons, it didn't come out right.
You know, aside from his hair, which is another issue, but I always find that interesting. But they the newest episode they had here in the States, which just debuted this past week, was on a third what he called the third series of the Range Rover, which I think is the L322,
something like that.
And he found this truck and it was obnoxious. I don't know if you need to track this episode down. It was an obnoxious color. It was bright blue with a bright blue roof. The concave part of the hood, you know, the clamshell hood, was blue, bright electric blue, and then everything else was black. But it wasn't just black. It was a matte black with a little bit of sand in it, so it has that texture to it.
Okay.
So and then there were highlights of blue in different bright blue in places. It was ugly. So he got that cheap.
Hopefully,
yeah, they did. Like I think he paid $5,000 for £5,000 for it. I think. And all the other ones were going for, I think, £20,000 or £30,000 at that edition.
Yeah, that's definitely a case where the paint job detracted from its value.
It definitely did, and it had a couple problems. The engine was sluggish. It was diesel. It was a 6-speed diesel, and I think they found not a
TDV6. You mean
TDV6?
Yeah,
I guess
the V6 diesel.
I don't know if it was 6 or not. I think it was. It must have been. Yeah, and they found one dead cylinder. But it wasn't the injector; it was the wiring to the injector. So he replaced the loom for £45, which was cheap considering.
Yeah. And
so that fixed the engine. That was good. And then the air suspension was inactive. So he tracked that down, and Ed did. Found on that model, the air compressor is in the boot. It's under the floorboard, and it actually sits in the well of where the spare tire would be. It goes so the spare tire goes around where that is. So he opened that up, took that out. It looks like a standard compressor because it's got a lot of insulation around it for the sound. And he found that this ring went bad. And the ring was probably cheap if you could find that ring because it's a special compression ring. So
it's a lip seal made of Teflon.
Is that what it is?
Yeah.
So he called around to the specialist, and that no one would sell it to him because they all know that even though it's a cheap part, but no one wants to sell it to him. They want to sell him another compressor. So he ended up having to buy a compressor for half the cost of what a new one would be. But I just found it interesting how that went down and how they kind of controlled that little part. And I guess for the air suspension, and later they moved it into the engine bay, if I'm not mistaken, in later models. But
yeah, they may have. That's where it was in the P38s, was under the hood as well. The problems there were heat and noise, both. You heard it running, and also it built up a lot of heat. That's why they tried moving it somewhere else, and I guess that didn't work either. But that Teflon lip seal is a weak link in all of the air suspension compressors. It was a problem in the P38s.
This little part, which probably only costs $5 or 5 pounds or something, just
yeah.
Back. Well, I guess as the pumps and it pushes in, it's supposed to get the ring gets bigger to create a better seal, and then it doesn't want to do that, and that's why then the pump fails.
Well, it's a lot like the piston rings in an engine.
Okay.
But the way the lip seal works, it's a little more like the hub seal in the wheels of your truck, but it's got that lip that presses against the cylinder, and yeah, they do wear out and they don't seal as well. And then the real problem is if you run it too long with a bad seal, then the piston gouges scores in the side of your cylinder, and you throw that away because that's aluminum as well, which is dumb.
Yeah, yeah. Well, apparently this one the Range Rover was smart enough to know that it was not working right, so it shut the whole unit down and killed all air suspension. Like it wouldn't even engage the pump.
Well, isn't that clever?
Yes. So that's how. And then so he took the pump out. He tested the pump. The pump worked. And then because we bypassed the control, and then the pump worked, and then okay, fine, the pump works. What else is going on? So he opened up the pump to find out why it wasn't putting out air, and why. As a result, the Range Rover, I guess the master computer knew it was having a problem, and just wouldn't engage the pump at all, and shut it down. Which I guess saved it. Probably saved the pump, but
saved the motor.
Saved the motor, and yeah.
If you can get the parts, which, I mean, theoretically they might be available out there, they're just very hard to find.
He couldn't find one.
There used to be a company out that put out a lot of that stuff for the P38s, and some of that stuff would cross over to the early or the early post P38, if you will, the 322, I think it is, the 2003 through 6 or 7 or whatever it is. But a lot of those parts would cross over, but the guy that was doing all that, at least in this country, has gone out of business. He was selling a lot of that stuff to a company in the UK called P38 Spares, and they still have a lot of his stuff in back stock, and so that stuff is available out there somewhat. But even the replacement parts don't last forever. It's a kind of a flimsy design. The compressor is undersized and overworked in a Range Rover, and that's really the issue there, is the pump is too small. They did that for cost savings, number one, and to keep it quiet, number two.
Yeah, it's an interesting episode. If you get a chance to track it down, it's neat to see and what they did to it. And I think they turned around and sold it for 13,000 pounds, I think, 12,000. They ended up making, I think they made 1,000 pounds on the deal, but
not bad for a week's work.
Morgan, why don't we get an update on your frame over?
Yes. As any project of this type it goes a lot slower than you would like.
Really?
Yeah, just a little bit.
I tell you.
I know this. You should see their shocked faces.
I mean, all you gotta do is just bring the parts over. It's no big deal.
Exactly. But yes, I have, as you probably recall, I had done some significant damage to the rear frame horns while unloading the rolling chassis. I have since straightened all of that out. No permanent damage. I still intend to weld on some reinforcements to make sure it's a little hardier going forward.
Which is good, because it was never all that strong to begin with.
Exactly. It's a very, very weak point. Which honestly made it a lot easier to bend back out. Certainly not easy, but a little easier.
Well, yeah, that design flaw worked in your favor in that sense.
Exactly. I spent quite a bit of time with a scissor jack and a high lift jack and hammers and a sledgehammer, pounding it back out. Scissor jack would get me a little ways, and then it would pretty much I switched back over to sledgehammer. So it was a fairly manual process. I've stripped down the rolling chassis to pretty much just the axles and the engine and transmission, so those will eventually just come off. I've got most of the interior out of my Land Rover that I will be switching everything over from, and am currently in the middle of the wiring. So I've been painstakingly labeling every wire and comparing it to the Green Bible and my other Haynes manuals to make sure I'm labeling it correctly and actually know what everything is. So when I get to the stage of putting it on the new truck, it'll go a lot smoother.
Now, are they following the standard color code, or it's all original wiring still, or has somebody done some stuff to it?
It's mostly original wiring, but it did have an engine conversion in it. So it has a Daihatsu diesel, and the person I bought it from said the wiring looked pretty clean, and I agreed. It looks relatively clean. But I did find that some of the patching that they did is non-standard. Okay. Not a whole lot of it, but a little bit. Yeah. Mainly the stuff going to the ignition and the cold start button and stuff like that.
Right, so you'll need to document that extra careful.
Exactly. So far I've got this really nice. I'm an IT guy, so I deal with a lot of wiring and labeling anyway. At the office, we have these really nice Brother labelers, right, which can actually do flag labels for cables. So I went and decided to spend the money, buy one for myself. So I've been labeling everything. So I've pretty much done what every wire goes to, and afterwards the color code of what it should be in the Green Bible, so that so far, 85% of it does line up with what it should be, but then there's that extra little bit, at least in the dash, that hasn't quite lined up. But interior, I've got all of the wiring out. I'm pretty much next up is the rear taillights and anything under the hood. So not a whole lot under the hood because it's the diesel, but there is some.
Now you say it's a Daihatsu in your truck?
Yep.
What's in the rolling chassis, engine-wise?
It's the standard 2 1/4 petrol. Unfortunately, it was parked and unknown condition when it was parked.
All right.
So I discovered that while they had stuffed rags in lots of the openings, at some point the carb had been left open. So
yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so you're not using that. You're going to migrate the diesel from your truck over.
Exactly.
All right.
So far, I've liked driving with that diesel. So, and it does modify anything in the engine bay, so it still leaves me open to dropping in some other diesel in the future if I decide to.
Yeah, I'm all for modifications if they make sense, if they don't commit so much butchery that you can't reverse it.
Exactly. Like, I have definitely considered the conversion that you have done on John's 109, doing the 200 DI. But right now I've got a working diesel, so I'm just going to stick with that.
Well, that could be your next engine. If for some reason you ever find a way to destroy the Daihatsu, then you know what you do as a replacement, right?
Exactly. Yep.
That said, I think the Daihatsu is going to serve you really well. I mean, I like the all Land Rover solution when it's possible. However,
yep,
you've got this. It's in. It does work. Why not go with it?
Exactly.
It's not like your truck has any significant collector value that you'd want to stay closer to original or anything.
Yeah, not at all.
And you have a known quantity also. That engine, the Daihatsu, is a known quantity.
Which
is a good thing.
Absolutely. And parts are a little hard. Right. It's working, works well. Parts are a little harder to get a hold of, but I have found a couple of parts suppliers in the UK I've bought some parts for it already. So,
well, there you go. And the details of the conversion have all been sorted out already, which is it takes a lot of the guesswork out of things.
exactly.
You need a website that will find parts for you for a Daihatsu.
Exactly. I actually considered it, but found that even on eBay, Daihatsu parts are very rare. I have a search that once every 6 months, a part pops up.
Wow.
Yeah. But there are actually a couple of other people with the same conversion in the U.S. There's actually somebody in New York State, actually not too far across the lake from me, who has the exact same setup. He's got the turbo version of the engine, but I don't need to add a turbo into the mix.
You don't want to overwhelm your series transmission. That's really the big issue. Once you start turbocharging, you start overwhelming the drivetrain, and that can be an issue, and just a lot more things to have to fix down the road.
Exactly. And I've had a few vehicles with turbos, and I've had turbo problems over the years, and it's just a problem I don't need to deal with again.
Yeah, if you can get away without needing it, you're better off, I think. That said, I'm in the process of turbocharging the ambulance, but I have a little bit heavier vehicle, and I just need a little more than I'm getting normally aspirated.
Exactly.
So how are your wiring issues coming along?
So far, they're coming along pretty well. Just in terms of labeling, it's going easily. I have found a couple of wires that were just flat out snipped off, so I have to trace those and figure out what somebody decided was no longer needed there. Hopefully it's all just petrol stuff. I don't recall off the top of my head.
Because that can tell you what they're for.
Exactly. I will probably drop an email when I get to that step.
That's
say,
fine.
hey, what was this again?
But, I mean, the diagram does have the letters next to them that give you the color traces. So, a lot of times you just look it up in the diagram and keep in mind, again, like we discussed in our last section on British wiring, that certain ranges of colors refer to certain functions, and that can often home you in on what you're looking for as well.
Exactly. And I've noticed quite a bit of that, as you spend days in the wiring labeling everything, you start to notice the patterns, which is nice. I kind of like that. It is.
And now you can walk up to a vintage Austin and still find your way around the same problems, and because you've done it on your series truck.
Exactly. And not to get too off the subject, but my boss actually picked up an Austin Healey Sprite just this summer, so haven't gotten to play with it or look under the hood yet, but,
Bug eye or post bug eye?
Bug eye, yeah.
Awesome. Those are the ones that bring the money. Actually, I think the post bug eyes are probably a better car, but the bug eyes bring the money.
Well, they look cool.
Well, they look different. That's for sure.
That's true.
Again, I think that was a situation where they did that to get around some headlight height regulations. But nonetheless, they are a cool car. In fact, they were huge about 15, 20 years ago out in California. The autocrossers loved them.
Nice.
You'll have to have him bring it to the Vintage Grand Prix in Pittsburgh next year, because there's a lot.
Totally.
They do get a nice turnout of Austin Healey's. Do show up.
Nice.
And I think there's at least 2 or 3 bug eyes I remember seeing in the past couple of years.
So anyway, you poked around a little bit with him, and I suspect that by the time you get your truck done, his will be ready to be rewired, so you've got a job waiting for you.
Exactly. And he actually, his first foray into British automotive wiring and everything was he bought a Norton and rebuilt that up from scratch. So he's got a little experience, but he has definitely asked for assistance on that one.
Same problems, just fewer of them with
exactly.
Norton, but it'll have the same issues. So yours is a Series 3 then, right?
It is.
All right, so it's probably fully vinyl-clad wire with a fabric braid over the top?
Yes, I haven't come across too much of the fabric braid, but it is definitely vinyl wrap.
Oh, that's right.
And vinyl wiring.
Yours is a later Series 3. And I bring this up because one of the things with the wire is that I think we had it in our previous discussion. We talked about how the wire doesn't really wear out, and that's basically true. But there are different kinds of wire, and not all wire is equal. And you'll hear terms like cloth covered and cloth wrapped and vinyl and that sort of thing. The difference between cloth covered and cloth wrapped is that cloth covered wire is actually the copper conductor is insulated with this like tar like rubber like stuff, and then covered with a cloth braid, which is then dyed in the color scheme to match the diagram. First thing that happens, of course, is those colors fade, or they run if they get wet or whatever. Then the cotton fabric breaks down, and leaving you with this sort of black. If it was rubber, it's turned to something else, and it gets crispy, and it flakes off, and then you have copper touching copper, and then you have a fire. So this is the stuff that people tend to think all British cars are wired with, and back 80 years ago they were. However, Land Rover, being evolutionary like they are, they replaced that stuff like a wire at a time or a subsystem at a time. And so like a lot of the Series 2As still have a lot of that cloth-covered wire. But then they would mix in the stuff that has the PVC, the vinyl cladding, if you will. The conductor is molded into a
Plastic.
Yeah, it's plastic-covered wire that has the coloring is molded into the plastic so that it doesn't go away. But then outside of that, it'll be wrapped in a cloth braid, and that's where you hear cloth wrapped versus cloth covered. And like my Series 3 is from the mid-'70s, and it was cloth wrapped, but it was all fully vinyl wire.
Nice.
Which is a good way to go. And then I think later they did go to just doing away with the cloth braid and just wrapping it all in vinyl tape, which really is the way that ends up being after you rework them anyway. Although that cloth braid on the outside really looks sharp when it's done right. Definitely.
Yeah, I've seen photos of the cloth braid on the cloth wrap, and it looks nice. But mine so far has all been vinyl wrap. Around the outside.
Yours is a later series truck, which is good.
Yep.
But it's important to know these types of things because if you do need to order parts, order wiring harnesses, it's good to know what you have and what you need. I will mention that there is a company out there that makes replacement wiring harnesses. It's called British Wiring. It's out eastern Pennsylvania somewhere. They have a website. It's called BritishWiring.com. Not to blatantly plug anybody, but they are good. They have the stuff. They can get you wiring harnesses for all this stuff, or they can build you a custom harness if that's what you need. But more importantly, and what I like them for, is they have all the parts. You can get bullet connectors, and you can get the female bullet receptacles, and you can get the 3-pin socket for the back of the Lucas alternators. And more importantly, you can get wire in 9, 14, 28, 56 strand. Remember, they don't use wire gauge in England. They count the strands. So you know the number of strands, but you can get those in most, if not all, of the standard color combinations. And I'm told that if they don't have it, they can order it in whatever color combinations you need. But you could buy all the stuff there and build your own harness if you wanted to. Or you could buy the pieces you need to fix the one you have.
And I have actually been eyeing them, so I'm glad you mentioned them. Because, like I said, there's just a small bit of wiring on mine that's just not standard in terms of color coding. So I'll probably replace those bits before I put the harness in the new truck, just to make sure it's accurate.
Yeah, and once you learn the system, which you're working your way through doing now, you may even find ways to do the additional circuits for your engine that aren't part of the original harness in colors that complement the system, so that it's much easier to figure out in the future.
Exactly.
What I do typically with this stuff is, I have buckets of wires in all the colors, because whenever I part something, I keep the wire. If it's burnt in the middle, there's still two ends that have good wire, and so I'll keep that stuff. I'm fine with that. I'll part out other vehicles, and if they have colors that I can use, I'll pull those wires. I'll sit down for an evening watching TV and strip a harness. I'm fine with that. I've parted out other kinds of European cars, and hey, wow, that's good wire. It's got the right colors. I need that. So The stuff that people throw away, which is the wiring harness, I'll harvest the wire out of it. So I keep all the wires. I need something a certain color. I'll go dig it out. I need this long. Here's a piece, and we go.
Exactly. Yeah, I would love to have that.
Well, all you need is a few extra acres and start collecting junk. It's not a problem for anybody.
Exactly.
But that's another way to do it. But and I've rewired vehicles and done some of that too. When I do a rewire, I mean, you can buy, like I said, you can buy these harnesses from these guys. Some guys like to go and get a generic harness from like a hot rod shop, get like a painless harness or a Ron Francis or one of those, and build it hot rod style with just what you need. But what I typically do is I'll pull a harness out, I'll strip it down, and I'll get the different colors out that I need, and I'll just start laying wires down. I know I need I need this wire, and I need that wire, and I need one that goes from here, and it goes to over there, and it needs to be this color. I'll grab it, and chances are it's there from the harness I just ripped out, and it's the right length, and I check it, make sure it's still good. I lay it down, and when it's all done, I tape it together, I terminate it, and we're good to go. Yeah, all you got to do.
Exactly.
Yeah, whenever you hear those words, it's time to run. Typically, that's why I emphasize that.
Yep. Yeah. So all I have to do is finish removing mine, do the minor patches. Fortunately, I haven't actually found anything that seems to be degraded. I found a couple of connectors that. Well, I found a lot of safety pins and metallic bubblegum wrappers in my dash.
Well, they make good fuse replacements.
They do. Surprisingly, none were used that way.
We used to use the springs out of the Bic Click pens.
Nice.
Well, they work for a little bit until they become filaments.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, so I found a couple of connectors that, the plastic protector was melted a little bit, but no wire exposed. So,
okay. Well, just double check your connections, make sure they're clean, of course. Because that's the thing. You get dirt in those bullet connectors, and it increases the resistance. And when the resistance increases, so does the temperature, and then that starts to burn stuff. And that's kind of where a lot of that temperature stuff comes. It's that or something that gets shorted to ground. It creates a short path that causes the fires. It's one of those two things. But as you go through it, if the wire looks good, make sure the connectors are nice and clean, replace the ones that aren't, that sort of thing. The other thing to think about...
I have
Go ahead.
Feeling that... I was just going to say that I have a feeling that most of the bullet connectors under the hood are going to end up getting replaced because they were very dirty. Pretty much everything that was in the dash, all the bullet junctions were nice and clean.
Okay, well, that's good. Actually, the bullets themselves, a lot of times you can clean up reasonably well. I have a problem with the females, but the problem with the females.
Don't we all?
Yeah, but if they don't,
resounding yes from everybody.
Yeah, if they don't clean up, you can replace those pretty cheaply. When you put those back together again, use a little dielectric grease. It does help. Something else you probably ought to think about is just in your power distribution system. You ought to think about fuses. You ought to think about relays, that sort of thing. I don't know how much you know about that kind of stuff, but go get yourself a nice fuse block, like 6, 8, 10 fuse, something like that. I think for me on a Series 2A, it takes 7 fuses to do it, and then the one spare on an 8 block is for future use. You could probably do it on a Series 3 in a similar number. Just make sure you're protected, all your important circuits. I would definitely put your headlights on relays. That way your harness is only delivering your signal, and your switch, your dimmer switch, which is expensive and fragile, is only delivering an amp to trigger a relay. And then you've got a nice 40-amp relay delivering the power to your headlights. Just run a fat power feed from the battery up to your bank of relays. Nice.
Yeah, I had actually been eyeing putting the headlamps on a relay. There's a little bit, because mine has an auxiliary, the little triangular auxiliary dash.
Okay.
With a couple extra things on it for like 4-way and all that. There was some custom wiring there, and somebody put on driving lamps. So I was going to move all of that stuff off onto relays and a new fuse box. But I honestly wasn't originally planning to do a whole lot with the rest of the existing wiring, mainly just for experience, not having much experience. But I'm totally open to which circuits are best to move over.
Anything that draws more than a couple amps ought to be on a relay.
Yep.
Basically. And really on a series truck, that isn't too much. That's just your headlight, basically your headlights and your driving lights, that sort of thing. Excuse me. But where I would put them is as close to the headlights as possible.
Nice.
I would run a nice fat wire up if I'd mount them on the breakfast or on the wing right rear of the breakfast. That's where I usually put them. You know, one heavy wire protected by either a circuit breaker or its own fuse in line. Probably 40 amps to feed both those relays. If you want, you could put your fog light relay or your driving light relay right next to that. I'm running 5 in a bank up front on the meat wagon because I've got fog lights, high beams, low beams, horn, and the siren.
Right.
So I don't think you need that many, but yeah, I have all that stuff up front. But so one good power distribution that's fused to feed that, and then basically at that point, most of your wiring on board the vehicle and most of your stock harness is behind the relay part of that. Then all you need is a wire from the output of the relay to the headlights, and I usually just slice the feed to the headlights. So you've got your blue and white wire. One of them goes into the relay, and one of them comes out of the relay. And it's still stock diameter, but it's really short, so it's not a lot of resistance on the outbound side. And it does 2 things for you. Number one, it protects your headlight switch and your wiring and all that stuff from fires. But the other thing is your headlights will get 20% brighter.
Exactly.
Just like that, from lack of resistance. And and the thing is, switches are only good for X number of cycles before they start. The contacts get pitted, they get carbon buildup, they get junk in there, whatever. They don't work as well. So your switch is expensive, but a modular relay is cheap. For $5, you throw it out, you plug another one in, and you're fixed. That's the great thing about relays.
Nice. Yeah, I will definitely have to do that.
So, and I would put the horn on a relay. That's a little bit more of a challenge, but it's worth doing because the horn draws more than most people think. And again, that's switch load, that's wire load. I've seen horn wires burn up in old series trucks.
And I've got the Series 3, so I've got all my my headlamps are not on it, but my turn signals and my horn are all on the one stock. So
yeah, and they're all on the same fuse too, so just keep that in
right.
mind.
Yeah, you don't want a little bit of smoke coming out of your steering column like I experienced.
Yeah, we're sorting through that problem with John's right now. He's got some German-made military-specific stuff that we're trying to sort out. It's a little different, so it's not exactly relevant to what you're doing. But yeah, similar kinds of things. That's on a circuit you want to try and protect as much as possible, and you want to get the load out of it as much as possible. You start taking the high draw stuff out of the stock harness, then your little fuses under the dash aren't working as hard either. So I mean, there's that to consider. But I would still, if you're doing a full rewire, especially like if you're doing a frame over, it's a good opportunity to do a full rewire. It's a good time to modernize with modern fuse block, and you can use blade fuses, which are easy to get instead of the little glass ones that are hard to find. Little things like that. They're cheap parts, but it makes a huge difference in terms of reliability, longevity, serviceability down the road because you can buy the parts anywhere, things like that.
Exactly. That's my thought on it. Is now is the time to do it.
Yeah, better now than any other time, really.
Yep.
Especially while you have everything ripped out of the truck, it's the perfect time to do it.
Well, you're really rewiring it anyway, so why not rewire it correctly at the same time?
So I have kind of maybe I'll make this a final question or a question at all. I don't know if I've asked a lot, but why not just completely rip out all the current wiring and replace it with more modern wiring in the right way? Why worry about replacing little bits here and there? I guess maybe it's a better question for Morgan because he's working on his truck and he said there are some parts that some wiring that was bad. He wanted to replace it. Why not replace all of it?
Well,
And
it really
I had looked at that.
It comes down to economics, really. I mean, you can go out and get a brand new harness and replace all your wires and do all that, and you'll be in good shape. However, if most of your harness is still good, it just needs a few repairs and a few modifications, then it's much more economical just to do that.
Exactly. And that's what I looked at. Pretty much my options were to either get a new factory original harness. Those are very expensive. You can get a new one from like British Wiring, much more affordable, or you can go to like the easy wiring, painless wiring option and do, completely new, non-British, but then you're really figuring out everything the hard way as well.
And it depends on how much you're paying for your labor at that point too.
Exactly, which,
that becomes a big job to make one of those work. I mean, you can do it, and a lot of guys do, especially the do-it-yourselfer guys who don't pay for their time and can spend weekends upon weekends sorting it out. But the downside to that is down the road you try to fix it. The guy that built it is the only guy that knows how to fix it.
Right. And that's sort of why I decided to stick with the stock harness, make anything that sort of is not a standard British wiring color pattern, make it match the color pattern. So at least if someone goes and looks in the green manual and says, oh, well, this is the diesel, even though originally it was the 2 1/4 petrol, they'll still be able to follow the diesel wiring diagram, find everything in the right places, yet I'll go in and, use
figure it out.
More relays and stuff like that.
Might take a little more work, but they could figure it out. On that note, I would say be careful and make sure you document where each system differs, meaning it's a diesel, but you're using the petrol wiring diagram. Document those differences very carefully.
Exactly.
And keep it in the truck, just in case.
Right. And so far, everything seems to match. Well, no, it doesn't exactly match the diesel wiring diagram. But yeah, pretty much it's like, for mine, it's the petrol wiring diagram, except for where you get to the actual dash and instrument cluster. Then it changes over. There's a couple of things that change, but it's relatively minor. But I definitely have to document it.
In and out of the ignition switch that are going to be different, and of course you have no distributor, so that part of it can be X'd out. But the glow plug circuit will be different.
Yeah.
But the big stuff, the lights, the charging system are mostly the same.
So your wiring's going to be done in, 10 or 15 minutes? Is that right?
Exactly.
Yeah, all he's got to do.
That's all he's got to do. That's all he's got to do.
All right, well, my parting comment about Morgan's truck is that when asked about how it was coming and what was left, Jesse James used to say, all that's left is everything.
I am definitely going to have to use that.
And on that note, that is the fifth edition of the CentreSteer podcast. And I suspect that our next episode will take place after Concave. So we'll have some information to bring to you about Concave. So that'll probably be in late September. And if I get adventurous, maybe I'll record something at Concave itself. That might be interesting. I got to think about that. So thanks very much for tuning in and listening to our episode, and hopefully we'll hear from you and you can listen in next time. And if you have any comments, feel free to pass them along. I have received absolutely zero so far. I wonder if anybody's even listening. So maybe I'll challenge to get somebody to listen and actually respond to us. All right. Thanks very much, everybody. The CentreSteer theme song, Sunset Rider by the Tritons, is available from Mibio's Music Alley. Check it out at music.mibio.com.
That is pretty fancy studio setup you got now. Certainly cuts all the background noise,
doesn't it? Well, so we're in the basement. This is my basement
until the neighbor's dog gets started. Hopefully, it'll help with that too. But
you shouldn't hear the neighbor's dog,
even though it's right outside this window.
No, it's up there.
Oh, I thought it was down the hill.
Well, there's other dogs here, but they don't bark as often, and they're like real dogs. They're like big dogs.
So unless he comes out with his beamer and starts smashing the wall again, we're okay.
Yes, that's correct. Right.
Okay.